Jensen and the Lady of the Manor, Part 6, by Jules Sanderson, read by Jules Sanderson, for FionaDobson.com. As I loosened my belt and my pants fell to the ground, I glanced both ways along the footpath that ran through the copse. No one was about, so I hurriedly stepped out of my trousers and reached into my pack, where Mrs. Sinclair had put a long burgundy pleated skirt. I pulled on the skirt, hearing just the sigh of the light breeze through the trees. Switching my anorak for the Aran sweater she'd packed, I then pulled on the wig she'd thoughtfully included. Repacking my pack, I retrieved my bicycle and quietly continued along the path. By the time I reached the road, I could already hear the distant sound of a police siren. Stepping off my old rally bicycle, now adorned with a basket over the front wheel, I walked beside the bike as the road climbed the hillside. Shortly I could make out a blue flashing light approaching at speed. The police car suddenly seemed upon me. It slowed as it approached. Then, as the driver got a good look at me, it once again lurched forward at speed and raced on, bound for Studley Constable, where a certain Justice Miles Fenwick had doubtless discovered the loss of £25,000 in cash from its hiding place in his study. By the time I reached the crest of the hill, the sound of the police siren was lost on the light breeze. I climbed back on the bicycle, enjoying the way the pleated skirt felt against my legs. I hiked it up a little so it wouldn't get caught in the pedals, then rolled quickly and quietly down Albion Hill. There was a 3-mile gentle downhill roll into the nearby village. But half a mile before entering the village, I stopped by a farm gate. I opened it wide, then wheeled the bicycle into the waiting horsebox parked behind an old Land Rover, as had previously been arranged with Mrs. Sinclair. Once secured, I climbed into the passenger seat of the Land Rover, where Mrs. Sinclair then proceeded to drive toward the manor. "Success?" asked Mrs. Sinclair, as she steered the ungainly vehicle along the narrow lanes. "Yes," I replied, "success." I opened my pack and pulled out a bundle of notes, secured with a grubby elastic band. Mrs. Sinclair smiled at me, looked me up and down, and said, "You know, that colour suits you." Quite satisfied that we were unobserved, Mrs. Sinclair parked the Land Rover in the courtyard, and we entered the big old house. My last visit to the place had been to liberate a Dickens first edition, but it had gone slightly awry, as you'll know if you've been following this story. We had long since decided being seen together was a risk we'd rather avoid. This instance was somewhat mitigated by the fact that a casual observer would just see 2 middle-aged women entering the old house. There was little likelihood any connection would be drawn between the highly respectable Mrs. Sinclair and the recently unemployed former assistant manager of Faversham's insurance agency. "But how on earth did you know the cash would be in the vase?" I asked. "Oh, I didn't. It was a wild guess, but an informed one." I felt a twinge of resentment. If I had not found it, I would have taken all that risk for nothing. "Oh, don't worry. I was pretty sure I was right," she countered. Mrs. Sinclair poured the tea, an ornate Victorian teapot, 2 cups and saucers, a small plate of biscuits, and £25,000 in £50 notes on the Regency table between us in the drawing-room. "Besides, that vase, well, it's worth at least 25,000 itself. It's a genuine Ming Dynasty vase, after all. His great-grandfather looted it himself from Shanghai. You forget I know these people well. My idiot husband used to fawn over the old fool, as though he were a Hollywood starlet. God alone knows why." "We'd never be able to unload a vase like that," I murmured. "It's too distinctive." "Precisely," agreed Mrs. Sinclair, "which is why we took the cash. When Bunny Flanders told me he was buying Fenwick's Bentley for cash, while he was half drunk, I should say, I figured he'd take the money straight to the bank. But then he let slip he couldn't get to Fenwick's place till the Saturday night. They doubtlessly sucked down all the gin they could in the early hours, and Fenwick, who never misses the early church service, never got to the bank in time. So I knew his place was going to be empty while he was at the church service." "Very clever," I said, "but how did you know the police would respond so quickly?" Justice Fenwick? Do you really think he doesn't have the Chief Constable's direct number? Handy that his place backed onto that copse, I muttered. Well now, said Mrs. Sinclair, rather handy that it's not a former Faversham's client. That's going to confuse things for that police officer who was so interested. Officer Stone, yes. You should probably change out of those clothes, said Mrs. Sinclair. Oh, it's okay. I'm good. Don't forget to subscribe for more Jensen stories, and you can always find great stories about cross-dressing at FionaDobson.com and on Patreon at patreon.com/FionaDobson.